revived American leadership in space.
3829. The rest of it up.
It's a particular pleasure to be back host and also to be here at the world's premier gateway to space. Join me in thanking the Kennedy Space Center and Director Bob Cabana for their tremendous hospitality. So it's wonderful to be here at this Apollo Center, Bob, and it's an incredible place. People have come from around the country and around the world to be inspired by the past, and now the present, and the future of American leadership in space. And we're truly grateful, Kennedy Space Center, for all that you've done and to continue to advance American leadership. Allow me to also bring greetings from a champion of American space exploration, someone who has revived Americans' leadership in human space exploration in just 4 short years. I bring greetings from the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. Today at this 8th meeting of the National Space Council, we will have updates from all of our council's members about the progress that we have made, both in civilian, economic, and military advances in space. But before I start, let me at least acknowledge the passing of an extraordinary American whose life and contributions to American aviation have undoubtedly led to inspire the advances that we've made in the vast expanse of space. This past Monday, America lost one of our greatest heroes. One of the greatest heroes not just in the history of the United States Air Force, but in the history of American aviation, General Chuck Yeager. He was a man of a humble background, grew up in rural West Virginia, enlisted in the military. He would go on to become one of the greatest aviators of all time. Chuck Yeager was a war hero. Shot down 13 Nazi aircraft, was himself shot down over France. Flew more than 150 military planes, a total of more than 10,000 hours, 30 years of active duty, and as history records, was the first man to break the sound barrier. General Chuck Yeager has now left us, made his final ascent, but it was my great honor as we renamed 2 Air Force bases as Space Force bases just a short efforts to rename an upcoming United States military base after the late and great General Chuck Yeager. I think people at Kennedy Space Center know, and all of us on the Space Council know, we literally would not be here today but for the achievements of General Yeager and all of those who've been inspired by his courage. And America will never fail. Will never fail or never forget the life and contribution of General Chuck Yeager. So as we gather for this 8th installment of the National Space Council, allow me to express my appreciation to all of the members of the Space Council and to reflect for just a few moments before we get started on how much has changed over the last 4 years since the very first meeting of this council. You know, when you look at national security, the progress that we've made in civil and private space sectors, one thing is clear. In 4 short years, America is leading in space once again. It's true. When we took office, the National Space Council had lain dormant for more than 25 years. President Trump articulated an inspiring vision for renewed America and said, and I quote, "We stand at the birth of a new millennium, ready to unlock the mysteries of space." And so we have set out to do. In our first year in office, the President revived this council to reinvigorate and coordinate space activities all across the federal government. The President brought together some of the best minds in government and the private sector to strengthen America's space enterprise. And so many of you are here with us today, and we're truly grateful. And whether it's providing for the common defense or growing our space economy across America, that's exactly what we've done throughout the past 4 years. In the very first days of our administration, the President signed multiple executive orders and presidential directives to reorient our space program to human space exploration. He took steps to unleash America's commercial space companies and to safeguard our national interests in the increasingly complex and competitive domain of space. In our first year in office, the President signed Space Policy Directive 1 and gave NASA a clear goal that we are going to go back to the moon, and this time we are going to stay. We made clear in our first year that the moon is not a final destination, but it's a base for his courage, and America will never fail or never forget the life and contribution of Chuck Yeager. So as we gather for this moment of the National Space Council, allow me to express my appreciation to all of the members of the Space Council and to reflect for just a few moments before we get started on how much has changed over the last 4 years since the very first meeting of this council. You know, when you look at national security, the progress that we've made in civil and private space sectors, one thing is clear. In 4 short years, America is leading in space once again. It's true. When we took office, the National Space Council had lain dormant for more than 25 years. President Trump articulated an inspiring vision for renewed American leadership in space in his inaugural and at the birth of a new millennium, ready to unlock the mysteries of space. And so we have set out to do. In our first year in office, the President revived this council to reinvigorate and coordinate space activities all across the federal government. The President brought together some of the best minds in government and the private sector to strengthen America's space enterprise. And so many of you are here with us today, and we're truly grateful. And whether it's providing for the common defense or growing our space economy across America, that's exactly what we've done throughout the past 4 years. In the very first days of our administration, the President signed multiple executive orders and presidential directives to reorient our space program to human space exploration. He took steps to unleash America's commercial space companies and to safeguard our national interests in the increasingly complex of space. In our first year in office, the President signed Space Policy Directive 1 and gave NASA a clear goal that we are going to go back to the moon, and this time we are going to stay. We made clear in our first year that the moon is not a final destination, but it's a base for developing and training for future deep space missions. We're going back to the moon, and then we're going to Mars and beyond. As we gather here in this historic place, I can't help but think back 48 years ago, December 1972, to Apollo 17, the last Apollo mission to the moon. It would be December 14th, 1972, that Apollo 17's commander, a Navy pilot named Gene Cernan, and a graduate of Purdue University in Indiana, he prepared to depart for Earth from the surface of the moon. And he spoke words that have really echoed through our time as an ongoing admonition. He said, and I quote, "America's challenge of today has forged man's destiny of tomorrow." And he said, "As we leave the moon, we leave as we came. And God willing, we shall return with peace and hope for all mankind." Gene Cernan was the last man to walk on the moon, but he didn't want to stay the last. He spent the rest of his natural life advocating for America to go back to the moon. And we are going to honor Gene Cernan's memory by putting the next man and the first woman on the moon in just a few short years. As you'll also hear updates today, the President also set NASA and the private sector, the entrepreneurial companies that have been involved in space exploration and development, in motion to ensure that we would return to the moon. And then the next astronauts on the surface of the moon, and all the economic development in space will be driven by American ingenuity. And we're going to ensure that Americans are going to be the very first. The very first not only to develop on the moon and Mars, but also to continue to develop the economic potential of space exploration. Even in this challenging year in the life of our nation, when Americans have sacrificed so much, we've continued to make steady progress toward that goal of renewed American leadership in space. This spring, it was my great honor to attend the first crewed launch, along with the President of the United States, from right here at the Kennedy Space Center. It's the first time we sent American astronauts into space from Kennedy Space Center in nearly a decade. And then, not to wait a minute further, this last November, I returned again to see the second crewed full-scale launch and mission of American astronauts from American soil back into American space. That's the result of real leadership and renewed American leadership in space. And what's remarkable is those rockets were built by American private enterprise in this new partnership that we have forged and built upon in the United States over the last 4 years. When a businessman turned president decided to renew our commitment to space, he knew it was important to unleash the power of America's private sector, and so we have done. As you will note out here today from the Secretary of Commerce, we went to work early on to cut and streamline out-of-date regulations that made the United States the #1 country in the world for space business, and will continue to accelerate investment and development in space. This past April, the President signed an executive order to recognize and promote the rights of private companies to recover and use space resources. That order, we believe, will provide the kind of clarity and stability that our businesses need to thrive. It will give our entrepreneurs the incentive to take our commercial space activity to all new heights. And just last week, NASA made its first commitments to buy lunar material from private companies, and will continue to build on creating the kind of incentives that will generate investment and space development for generations to come. And even as we make great progress in expanding America's commercial activity in space, we also recognize the challenges of digital threats to our space operations. And that's why the President established cybersecurity principles for all of our space systems, whether government or private. The President put in place the world's first comprehensive space traffic management policy as well, and made it clear that we're going to use the resources, the capabilities, and the technologies of the private sector to make all space activities safer and more secure than ever before. It's amazing as you think about all these accomplishments in renewed human exploration in space from here in the United States, the difference that all these distinguished members of the National Space Council have made in America's future in space. But at the time that we acknowledge the progress that we have made in expanding human space exploration and reviving American space enterprise, we recognize that there are challenges and even threats in space as well. As I just said, as we dedicated 2 Air Force bases now as the first 2 Space Force bases in America. Space is a vacuum, but we aren't operating in a vacuum when it comes to our national security. The space race that began in the 1950s continues today. We are in the lead, but we are not alone. As you will hear today in the National Space Council from the Director of National Intelligence and others, China and Russia are continuing to develop space weaponry. Russia demonstrated a space-based anti-satellite weapon earlier this year. China is developing a new manned space station, and its robotic spacecraft will return samples from the moon in just a matter of weeks. In fact, China is increasingly emerging serious in space, just as they are in other areas of the global economy and to the strategic interests of the United States. As the world witnessed, China recently landed an unmanned craft on the moon, and for the first time, robotically raised the red flag of communist China on that magnificent desolation. All of that competition, the investment of other nations on Earth, and security in space is among the reasons why our Commander-in-Chief took the unprecedented step of establishing the first new branch of our armed forces in some 70 years. President of the United States, now, almost a year ago, signed into law the creation of the United States Space Force. Under President Trump, the highest priority of our administration is the safety and security of the American people. And where too often in the past, America has neglected growing security threats in space, this president called for extending our dominance on land and sea and air to the final frontier. It would be June of 2018 when President Trump laid out his vision for American military power in space. He called for the creation of that new military service that we spoke of today at the dedication of those bases. I believe it is a tribute to the President's leadership as well as the leadership of all the military personnel that are gathered here today, that literally in just a year and a half after our President first called for the establishment of a Space Force, after it had been talked about for a half a century, he was able to sign it into law. Extraordinary to think of the contribution that the United States Space Force will make to the security of our nation and the perpetuation of our freedom. As Deputy Secretary Norquist will reflect in a few minutes, the Space Force is growing stronger by the day. In fact, Secretary Barrett and I were not long ago in Colorado Springs when we saw the first 86 company-grade officers commissioned into the United States Space Force. And we're pleased to be joined today by the Chief of Space Operations, the man who has been working around the clock to stand up the United States Space Force. Join me in thanking General J. Raymond, who's with us here today. Yep. So we've made great progress. We evidenced that today in the dedication of Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and also Patrick's Space Force Base right here on the Space Coast in Florida. And I know the Lieutenant Governor of Florida is with us here today and is pleased to see that. But just like 42 years ago when Gene Cernan was on his way to the moon, and just like when Chuck Yeager was breaking the sound barrier in the 1940s, continues to face an era of competition. But as members of the National Space Council know, it's a competition that America is winning today, and we're going to keep on winning in space for generations to come. And that's one more reason today why I'm pleased to announce that the President, as of today, has issued a new national space policy that we will articulate at this meeting of the National Space Council. The National Space Policy provides the President's direction to the executive branch on all space activities. It emphasizes that space is critical to our security and our way of life, and lays out
this, what we live in, with all the stuff that you see, wars, famines, corruption, that's basic. All right, so we look around us and we know that there's something wrong. Because your neighbour next door is a nice person, your family are nice, people you work with are nice. People want to have a nice society where we can live in peace and just live and be free of wars. So you think, well, where's it coming from? Where is this constant tribulation that we have to go through? Now think 500 years back. If you think we haven't got it so bad, well, these days, 500 years ago, the Catholic Church, some of the chambers of torture in the Inquisition. Now, you guys could easily be classed heretics and you could have been led to the Inquisition. So you just think back to those days, the Inquisition and the Crusades and all the Dark Ages, and how much our brothers suffered, mankind suffered. And we see now that we know things are really gone pear-shaped. What's the origin of it? Well, I'm going to expose it. Expose it with a little bit of history. The Catholic Church, the Roman cult, has been very, very, very busy in the last couple of thousand years. Starting with the Julian dynasty, then the Flavian dynasty, then the Antons, the Antonys. We had the empire. Rome was a republic, became an empire. Just like that, overnight, they killed Julius Caesar, bang, Augustus. It's an empire. This empire is our enemy, as you will see, because it has morphed as it's gone through the ages with the backing of the Roman cult and a very, very dark priesthood, who through their sorcery and evil and their papal bulls, they seal those papal bulls, they put a spell on them, they put them in their vaults, and what is written on those papal bulls goes. Why? Well, because they're sorcerers. And because when you make a claim of right, which in law means, hey, these are mine, I'm claiming them. Well, I've got the highest claim of right because they're in my hands. I brought them here. The evidence is there. So they're mine. What the Catholic Church in 1802 very, 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 very powerful date in history. Pope Boniface VIII very similar to my name, by the way. My name's Bonacci, and that is, bon means good. Now get this, right? Face means to do in Latin. Do-gooder. This guy was a contemporary of Dante Alighieri. Dante Alighieri, who wrote Paradise, someone help me, the Divine Comedy. He condemned this guy to the bottommost parts of hell for how wicked Pope Boniface is, and you're going to see. There's his tombstone. You see the crown? It's a double crown. Put that on because King Philip in France had a crown. And Prince Philip was a nasty, nasty guy. He's the one who in 1307, get these dates, they destroyed the Knights Templar. They had to, because they were rivals. And they were doing things the right way, the original Knights Templar. That's when Philip and Clement, the Pope, after Boniface, they had Jacques de Molay in prison for 7 years. They smashed every bone in his body. They blinded him with hot irons, roasted his testicles in oil. They did everything to that man with their little devices. This is the sort of devices the Roman cult has used for a long, long time, and they're still using them in a spiritual sense in the courts. And I'm going to show you this. The courts are run by these people. Everything that happens in court is ecclesiastical. Everything. I know a few of you know this, so it's not a surprise, but some of you may not. But this is three years ago. But the stuff from these websites, you might want to put these down. These are all linked to my website, universaltruthschool.com. So if you've got a pen, you might want to write this down. I'm leaving this up for a bit. But most of the information that I'm telling you, you can source here. And it's Franco Collins in Sydney. He's going to, he's basically the information comes from here, so you can source that here. Now, back to Boniface, our little friend. So, he put that second crown on his head to do one up on Prince Philip. So they got together, the Vatican and Prince Philip, and they destroyed the Knights Templar. But what happened in this year was this guy, in 1302, created the first express trust in history. What's a trust? Well, the Crusaders were going off to Jerusalem, leaving their homes, their palaces and their riches behind. So they developed an idea. They would say to their most trusted friend, you, I want to hand over my estate to you in trust, and I'm off to Jerusalem, I'm fighting for Christ. That's what the Crusades are all about, isn't it? That's another story. Anyway, so when I come back, you're my best friend. You're the best person. So he becomes the trustee, the owner of the property. What would happen was some of these knights would come back, and the guy their best friend that they left these treasures with, got used to the treasures and decided that they would keep them. And guess what? The courts would not support the knights, because the trustee had the right to keep the property. That's how the trust started. It worked. They worked for most people, but for some of them, they didn't get their property back. What happened was this guy and the Catholic Church, always desiring to control with their inquisitions, decided that they would create the first express trust in history. All right, that trust is called Unum Sanctum. What does the papal bull say that they created to stick in their vault and put their spell on that has cursed the Unum Sanctum? It says that all the world and all the souls in it are ours. Remember the right of claim? This is mine. Well, a claim of right. They made a claim of right. They rocked up, sitting on top of the world, look around, seeing all these people sleeping, got all these gold in their vaults and all this power, and they said, we own the world. And so they do, because no one has challenged that. No one has challenged Unum Sanctum, this papal bull. It's in the vaults. And it's a curse on mankind, and I'll show you how. This was the first express trust in history. So they have claimed the whole world and all the souls therein. And you will see, by virtue of your birth certificate, that that is the title of your soul that they own in their registries. They have registered you. And that is the title to your soul. So what you're going to learn in the second half of this presentation with Serena is how to collapse those trusts, because it's the only way to get out of the system and claim your dominion as children of God, of the universe, and not as their slaves, as people lost at sea, incompetent. Because that's when you walk into court, an incompetent, dead, with no soul, because they own it. And those black judges who are priests of Baal, they are ecclesiastical. And I'll show you that after we go through a little bit more history. This is painful history, because if anyone of you have done their history and read a lot, like through the Dark Ages, you'll know how much humanity suffered. Do you remember the Huguenots in France, the Lollards in Scotland, the Collegiants, the Socinians, the Anabaptists, These guys started the Inquisition at that time because people were waking up back then. But they killed that. Then 200 years later, the Renaissance, that came back through the Hermetic wisdom that they were drawing from Egypt via Hermes, the Hermetica, which created all the geniuses that have ever existed, because every genius has read the Hermetica, because that's where the Bible draws all of its inspiration from. Michelangelo, they were weaned on the Hermetica. What happened? Well, we're going to go through a bit of history to show how they came down on that awakening too. That Renaissance was squashed. This one ain't going to get squashed. This one, people are waking up. We shouldn't be angry about what they represent. It's the fact that they are insane. They're insane. The elite families who control the Vatican and who are behind this corporation, and it's the corporation of the Apostle Peter. Because Constantine, we can go earlier than this, we can go to 325, Constantine the Great. Supposedly, hundreds of years later, they found Constantine's donation. And that donation was written to his Pope Sylvester, to his... Constantine was, of course, the emperor. The Pope was Sylvester. And apparently Constantine says to Sylvester in this document, saying of this earth to, therefore we're going to claim taxes based on that, on the donation of Constantine. We're paying taxes because of that fictional document, guys. All taxes to Rome. And the elite families, the insane Khazarian and Venetian black nobility families, just like the Saxe-Coburg Gothers, that the Windsor family, false name. These are the black nobility family. Bankers, bullion brokers. There's a book called Babylon's Bankers. There's a chapter in there called Monotheism, Military, Money, and monotheism. Military, money, monarchies. He has exposed that this gathering, this cabal, they can't work separate from each other. A lot of people, when they see this pyramid of control, and they put the Queen on the top, and the Zionists, and the Freemasons, don't understand that the Vatican and the Jesuits and the Superior General of the Jesuits actually sit on top, behind the scenes, but they work together. Then they have, that's the crown, and then they have, that's the crown and the elite, insane families of the world who think they have better blood than the rest. And they have their think tanks. Then they have their financial control system, world resource control, world population control, and there's a little sheep down the bottom called debt slaves. We're all indebted. And we all bleed financially because taxing your wage. You go to work and you get taxed. Half of it goes to the government. We'll get into that a bit later. Okay, in 1455, we have a testamentary trust created. The first testamentary trust in history. That was Nicholas V, Pope Nicholas V, 1455. This was, bear in mind at the time, it's only like 20 or 30 years before Christopher Columbus sailed off to discover the Americas, right? This trust, this testamentary trust, which conveyed all of this property that the Vatican claimed, the whole world, they conveyed it into this trust. It's a trust that claims all your real estate. You know that you have? You don't own it. You own nothing. You do not own a thing. Well, you can't anyway. They're molecules. They belong to the universe, for a start. But the Vatican knows this. They know you can't own things. You can have right of use. That's all that title means. You will never own it. Never in this system. In this system, which is about to end. This one is called Romanus Pontifex. Romanus Pontifex. This one is crown. This is where the crown originated. Remember that double crown? That's going to morph into a triple crown because there are three trusts. This is the first one. There's two more to come. See that triple crown? That's called the tiara, the papal tiara, or the triregnum, the three kingdoms. What are those three kingdoms? Well, this is one of them. This is their fictional kingdom that they created. Remember Shrek and the king and his fictional characters? Same deal. Exactly the same deal. There it is in modern times. This pope wore it. The last three popes refused to wear it. And there's Pope Boniface. That's him. That's who Dante confined to the bottommost pits of hell. And he and his successor pope did what they did to the Knights Templar. Very important, because they stole the Knights Templar technology and corrupted it like they do with everything for power and control. In 1481, now get this, 11 years before Columbus set sail, another trust. Now these three trusts, in the end of the trust, which is the introductory words of the trust, the testament, or the bull rather, it's the bull, the papal bull. The incipit says, for a perpetual remembrance. That's trust. Right? Now, this one's called attorney. Attorney A-E, that's an A, excuse my writing. Attorney Regis, the Eternal Crown. This is Pope Sixtus, the fourth. Pope Sixtus the fourth. And this is the second testamentary deed, trust, deed and will. The second crown, this is the Commonwealth. The crown, the Commonwealth was born here. You think these are all English things, don't you? No. The Queen serves the Pope. The Vatican is the most powerful entity on this planet, accepting these people, the Knights Templar, or the Temple Bar rather, I forget the year, were granted this is in the City of London, the square mile. This land has no title. That is the only land in the Western Hemisphere, or you could, because as you'll see, this system has spread its tentacles all around the planet, but mostly in the court systems, in the Western court systems, which I'm going to show you. So we're going to go to that now in a minute once I get off the history. When you go to court, you will see it. You'll see it, who they are, those judges and magistrates, who exactly they serve. It's not you. And there's no justice. There is no justice. That's why you wonder when you hear these outrageous things that happen in court. Innocent people who were speeding or something, who had some marijuana, and they're in prison. My God, there's some suffering in our prisons. In 15 the third trust. This one takes away your real estate. When you register with your birth certificate, that number is the number of these three Sestui KV trusts. Learn this word. That's the name of your enslavement. That, in Latin, is six. 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 There are three of them. That's six in Latin. That's six. There are three Sestui KVs. Sestui, that's the Triple Crown. They own and sit on the crown. They are the kings of these trusts, which have taken away your real estate, your personal property, and your soul. This is for baptism, for Catholics. That's why they want baptisms. That's why they go around converting. And that has stolen and deprived us of our real wealth. These are worth $1 million. If you've got a birth certificate in this country, in the Commonwealth,